Episode 139. Lee Strobel tries to make a case for heaven. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, I'll be reviewing a conversation that Lee Strobel had with Justin Brierley in April 2022. In that discussion, Lee tried very hard to make a case for heaven, and I will fact check his claims, examine the points he makes, and reveal why his case is utter bunk. It literally is wishful thinking gone wild. The original YouTube of the conversation is at link 1 in the show notes. It's not long, about 20 minutes. Lee's Case for Heaven movie is at link 2. It's longer, at almost 2 hours. As always, there will be further links in the show notes to support some of what I say, so please do check the notes for additional information. I'll skip the introduction and head to Lee's first comment, where he talks about his own near-death moment. It sets a scene for just how credulous Lee is, and why his case is simply not evidence-based.
I kind of call it a brush with death. My wife found me unconscious on the bedroom floor. She called an ambulance. I remember waking up in the emergency room and the doctor looked down at me and said, "You're 1 step away from a coma, 2 steps away from dying." And then I went unconscious again. I had an unusual medical condition called hyponatraemia, which is a severe drop in blood sodium levels.
See link 3 for details on hyponatraemia. It is potentially serious and can cause death. Interestingly, the complications include altered mental states and permanent neurological dysfunction.
And I was at a level where I could not sustain life. And so I hovered between life and death for quite a while until the doctors were able to save me in a very delicate procedure. And what I learned about coming close to death like that is it's a very clarifying experience. I mean, things become very sharp at that moment. I mean, there's nothing more important than what happens when you close your eyes for the last time in this world.
Being close to death can, and does, have that impact on people. Link 4 goes to a Psychology Today article explaining exactly that. It doesn't require God belief to have your perspective on life changed by a close brush with death.
And so as a Christian, I believe what the Bible teaches about the afterlife, but I've still got this skeptical gear, this...
Have you? Have you really?
Background in journalism and law, and so I thought, well, how much do science and how much does philosophy and history and so forth, how do other disciplines interface with the biblical claims and either support them or conflict with them? And that was the genesis of starting the research on the case for heaven.
Remember, Lee was already a Christian when he had this experience. This wasn't an event that converted him. This was an event that reinforced what he already believed about God. Was he really going to be fully skeptical? Was he really going to ditch Christianity if he didn't find what he was looking for? Of course not. Or was he going to interpret what he found in the light of what he already believed? You betcha.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting book done in that usual journalistic style that you bring to the Case for books throughout. You talk to a whole range of people, both skeptics and people who are convinced that there's a sort of supernatural dimension to life. Tell us about sort of how this translated into being a film, though, because it's one thing to write a book, it's another to write a film. Tell us a bit about the relationship you've got with the director and so on, and how that all came together.
We don't need to hear the sales pitch about the movie, so we'll just skip right on by that part.
So I think the storytelling of a film is quite compelling and can bring the reader along, or the viewer along, in a way that that is entertaining but also informative. So,
sure, but is what the film conveys actually true? What is the journalistic and sceptical integrity that has been applied to the facts that are alleged?
We're happy with how it turned out. It was, by the way, it was totally unscripted. I never knew what he was going to ask. It's all off the cuff. I wish I could go back and do a few of the interviews over again. But he would surprise me with these questions, and we just went with it as best we could.
Well, That doesn't inspire me with any confidence.
I mean, obviously, you draw on a lot of what the research you did in the book itself. Maybe we could sketch out 3 key things that you maybe discovered in the course of doing that, Lee. I'm particularly, I suppose, interested in the kind of evidence that is available to everyone, skeptical or believer, when it comes to things like, I know you cover things like near-death experiences.
Right.
You talk about the latest sort of science of consciousness
Yes.
and what that's telling us. So tell us maybe about 2 or 3 key areas where you think there's a really interesting conversation going on about the idea that actually we don't expire when we die, that there is a kind of continuing consciousness.
Well, so 3 issues. First would be the existence of the soul.
What about the existence of the soul, Lee? We know that Christians like to propose the idea because it does seem to be essential to Christian belief. But there isn't actually any science that can be used to confirm that. You're not going to assert that the soul exists as though it's established fact, are you, Lee? Because that would betray both you and Justin as not approaching this subject with any sort of journalistic integrity.
Do we have an immaterial dimension to us? Do we have a consciousness, a soul, a spirit?
No, we don't. At least not one that we can demonstrate, not one that we can detect, not one that we can examine, not one that we can test, not one that we can investigate with any kind of reliability. All we have is vague and unreliable stories, Lee. Come on, are you a storyteller or are you a skeptical journalist?
So I interviewed Dr. Sharon Dirckx with a PhD from Cambridge, who's a neuroscientist, and has written a book called Am I Just My Brain?
Link 5 for information on Sharon. She's a Christian, and so isn't unbiased on this topic. She has been on Unbelievable while Justin was host, and also appears in Lee's film. She is someone who is very friendly to Lee's perspective. I wonder if Lee produced a balanced film which featured people who are critical of his conclusions. Oh, am I kidding? Of course he bloody well didn't.
And she takes a position that indeed we are a hyphenated creature, so to speak. We are a body and a spirit, a mind, a consciousness.
But can she actually demonstrate that? You'd have thought if she could, your movie would be full of that, instead of just, stories of dubious source.
And then the question is, can that consciousness survive our physical death?
First, you need to show it exists, which you haven't established. As hinted at earlier, you've asserted it and assumed we all agree.
And I was a skeptic about near-death experiences. I thought, okay, these are probably either made up or they're just an example of oxygen deprivation to the brain causing hallucinations or something like that. But I found there have been 900 scholarly articles written about near-death experiences in scientific and medical journals over the last 50 years. It's a very well-researched area.
The phenomena of near-death experiences is certainly well-researched, but it is not exhaustive. We know these experiences occasionally happen, and we know that they are interpreted within the cultural context of the person who experiences it. We also know that the brain does weird things when starved of oxygen, or under stress like when it's close to death. These are all things that are known and can be demonstrated through actual, testable, evidential criteria. What cannot be demonstrated with any reliability beyond claims from believers is a consciousness that is separate from the physical, biological body.
And interestingly, the Lancet, the famous medical journal in the UK, carried an analysis of near-death experiences that concluded that none of the alternative explanations can account for this phenomenon.
I'm not sure what item Lee is referring to, but link 6 goes to a Lancet item on the subject. Unsurprisingly, the Lancet item does not conclude what Lee has just suggested. The best that can be taken from this Lancet item is that we simply do not have enough information to make any firm conclusion. It is at this point where any last vestiges of hope in Lee being journalistically truthful have died. It is my view that Lee is making shit up to justify his beliefs and sell his books. He belongs in the same bucket of slop into which John Lennox and Gary Habermas have already been dispatched.
And so what I look for were cases where we have corroboration. That is, people who saw things or heard things or experienced things during their out-of-body experience. It would have been impossible if this wasn't authentic.
You mean something like the replicable study at Link 7, which resulted in exactly 0 patients identifying the sample image. This matches your criteria, Lee. Why do you not mention it? Why is subjective experience which cannot be replicated your preferred methodology? Is it because when the event is told as a story, you get to control the alleged facts, and no one is able to replicate it?
And so the famous case of Maria, who died in the hospital of a heart attack, and yet she said, my spirit detached, floated out of the hospital, up and out of the hospital. And when she was revived, she said, oh, by the way, there's a man's shoe on the roof of the hospital.
See the links at 8 for more detail on the Maria story. There are some very key details about this story that Lee does not mention. Gary Habermas loves this story too, and he misses out the same key facts. The first one is, the story is second-hand. No one knows who Maria is, or where she is. She has not been interviewed about it. Everything is from a social worker by the name of Kimberly. But no one mentions this. The details about the shoe are also oddly specific. Yet no one has come forward to confirm the position and condition of the shoe. Not even a photo. Okay, the story is allegedly from 1977, so maybe we can forgive the lack of a photo. If these events are as regular and reliable as Christians like to suggest, why is the poster child story 50 years old and unverifiable? Did you know that the story wasn't made public until 1984, 7 years later? It's almost as though Kimberly invented the story and then created enough of a gap to make it hard to investigate. All of these should be enough to kill the story dead. But no, Christians will keep on kidding themselves that this is a well-documented and reliable story that is worthy of belief. No wonder so many think the New Testament Gospels are reliable history.
It's left-footed, it's dark blue, there's some wear over the little toe, and the shoelace is tucked under the heel. And they go up in the roof of the hospital and they find it just as she had described it.
All this according to the account by Kimberly, yet no corroboration from this Maria because no one knows who she is, and no corroboration from anybody in the hospital because no one knows who they are. All second-hand. And we're supposed to believe that this is a corroborated story? Really?
That's the kind of corroboration I was looking for.
Remember, Lee is supposed to be using journalistic credentials to investigate this story. Justin himself has journalistic credentials as well, because that's the job that he does. And yet in an afternoon's work, me, without any journalistic training, have managed to find real, serious problem areas with the Maria story that neither of them are bringing up.
And I found multiple cases of corroboration, including the case of Vicky NDE, who was blind virtually since birth, and yet during her near-death experience she could see for the first time.
Link 9 for details on the Vicky story. What's striking about this testimony is the lack of visual detail. Things and people are mentioned as being seen, but there is no specific detail. No colours, for example. The team in the operating theatre are described as female and male, something that can be determined from sound, but no mention of anything specific about them that would only be known if they were seen. It's elements like this that raise legitimate questions about integrity. Oh, and this is another event from 50 years ago. Lee really does like his anecdotes to be as hard to validate as possible.
And I interviewed, interestingly, John Burke, who's a pastor of a Christian church in Austin, Texas, who has researched 1,000 near-death experiences over 30 years. And his conclusion is, if you look at the core of what takes place in a typical near-death experience, not how people interpret it, because people interpret it through their own religious or cultural lens, but if you look at what actually takes place, it is consistent with Christian theology.
Christian pastor subjectively analyses 1,000 NDEs and determines they all talk about the same Christian God, the one that he worships. How fucking convenient. Wow. Somebody call the scientists.
And then the third area I looked at was the resurrection of Jesus. Because if Jesus truly died and was resurrected on the third day, it confirms his identity of being the Son of God. Therefore, we ought to take seriously what he says about the afterlife.
Okay, sure. But as past episodes of Still Unbelievable have already established, the resurrection of Jesus is not established fact. it's problematic in and of itself. So, Lee, that statement has created for you an enormous hurdle to get me over. Good luck, I tells you. Good luck.
And so I look at what is the evidence that indeed he did conquer the grave, which I believe is powerful and persuasive, and then what he says about what the afterlife is like. So those are kind of three areas that the film touches on and I touch on in the book, as well as some other things.
I mean, all of them could be a show in themselves,
yes,
as you know, Lee. But when it comes to near-death experiences,
yeah.
I mean, I think some people kind of regard that as a rather kooky area, you know, very subjective. And I think that's partly because there has been, sadly enough, some particular instances of Christian published books which have turned out to be in some way false or simply, you know, overblown and so on.
This inconvenient fact ought to put people off from chasing this dead end. But no, Lee still keeps bravely fighting on.
Key to me is those cases where we do have this kind of corroboration. Because people have made up stories. And so I wasn't interested if someone says, oh, I died, I met Jesus, he's 5'10", he's a nice guy. I don't know if that's true. I can't corroborate that.
You also can't corroborate the shoe on the roof, but you apparently have no problem believing that one, Lee.
But when somebody, for instance, one woman who died in the aftermath of an abortion, came back, was revived, she said, oh, by the way, on the ceiling fan in the emergency room of the hospital, on the top of the blade, there's a red sticker.
I tried very hard to find references to this story, but Lee gives precious little detail, and I could not corroborate that this story even exists, let alone any details about it.
In no way she could have seen that from where she was in the hospital room. They got a ladder, they went up, and they looked, and sure enough, there it was exactly as she had said, because her spirit had separated, and she was looking at from that unusual vantage point.
Skipping over the aforementioned lack of confirming detail at all about this story, simple question, how does a spirit see something when the eyes that the body belongs to are below it? When there's no physical eyes connected to it, how does it see anything at all? I'd love to see that one explained.
You know, the Bible talks about this intermediate state. The Apostle Paul said to be absent from the body to be present with the Lord. Jesus said to the repentant criminal on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise.
So rather than investigate these weird stories and working out where they could be wrong, Lee automatically assumes that they're confirming of his preferred holy book.
Which suggests that there's two aspects to the Christian afterlife. One is the intermediate state, which is when we die, our soul separates from our body. We either go into the presence of the Lord if we're followers of Christ, or we're separated from Him. And then the second phase comes at the consummation of history, when Jesus returns, when we're reunited with our now resurrected bodies, when we go through final judgment, and then spend eternity in a very physical place, whether heaven or hell.
And how exactly does a dodgy story about a shoe on the roof confirm any of that?
So these near-death experiences tend to be confirming of this idea that our spirit, our soul, separates.
If you say so, Lee, but you really are exposing your biases here.
It is important to remember that these people who have near-death experiences are not irreversibly dead. So they're clinically dead. They have zero brain waves. They have one woman had every drop of blood drained from her head in preparation for some highly unusual surgery, and yet she had these experiences and saw these things that were that she could confirm.
Lee is talking about the Pam Reynolds case. See the links at number 11. Lee is right about the condition of the operation that Pam endured. It was in 1991, and Pam's body was reduced in temperature, her heart was stopped, and blood drained from her head. The information about her accurately recalling a single medical implement and apparent conversation are claimed, but not validated. The links do not have her testimony, and nor do they have the testimony of the medical professionals concerned. All the alleged facts are made by third-party individuals, and none of them refer to any method of validation of the claims. This is suspect. This lowers my credulity towards this case, and I am surprised by how much credence Lee gives it. What is also interesting about Lee's reporting of this case in his documentary, see the link at 2, is that the single alleged case of medical implement being identified is pluralised into multiple. Additionally, the vague claim about Pam hearing a conversation has become specific identified phrases in Lee's video. As the details have changed from the original report, specifics have been added to make the story more impressive. This is classic human behaviour and in no way adds to the reliability of the original. Instead, it makes the whole story less believable. It makes Christians like Lee and Gary Habermas, yes, and Justin, appear dishonest and manipulative. If this really is one of the best cases for the validity of out-of-the-body experiences during an NDE, then I call bullshit.
So, but they're not irreversibly dead. They're coming back. So that's something we have to keep in mind in these cases.
Which also means the brain is still capable of receiving inputs, but its state probably means those inputs are mistranslated, misdiagnosed, misinterpreted.
One of the most fascinating cases was a 7-year-old girl named Katie who was found face down in a YMCA swimming pool. She had drowned. Her brain had massive swelling. She had 0 brain waves. She was declared dead.
This was another story which I could not validate. I could not identify any claims related to these facts.
But during that period where they were keeping her body alive, just trying to figure out what to do, she said, I was conscious the whole time. And the doctors were very skeptical. So they said, well, okay, how about this? She's 7 years old. We gave her some crayons and a piece of paper and said, why don't you draw for us the emergency room where you were taken?
You're going to ask a 7-year-old with crayons to draw an emergency room, and you're going to expect something you can work with? Come on. Okay, it's not funny that a 7-year-old got into that state. That's not funny. But really, you're going to expect a 7-year-old? Oh dear, fucking hell.
And she was able to place everything in that drawing the way it is in the emergency room.
Oh my God. Really? Really, Lee? Really?
And then she said one night, while my body was being kept alive in the hospital and my parents visited me, I followed my parents home. And she was able to describe what they had for dinner that night, what her brother played with on his bedroom floor, what toys he was playing with, what song her sister was singing to her Barbie doll that she was combing its hair, where her father was sitting in the living room, and what clothing they were wearing, all of which checked out.
This is an obscene level of detail to expect from a 7-year-old. And why can't I find any details about it, Lee? What makes this story unbelievable, though, is that the parents of a 7-year-old in hospital, close to death, went home. Of course they didn't fucking go home. They were in hospital, sleepless and not hungry, anxiously pacing up and down the corridors, worried sick about their child. Fucking hell, Lee. Have you no common sense? Have you no decorum? Do you not see the insanity in the story that you have just told? Can you not smell the bullshit? I know I can.
In fact, one study of nearly 100 near-death experiences where people made these kind of verifiable observations.
If there are so many verifiable observations, Lee, why haven't you actually provided any?
A remarkable 92% were absolutely accurate. Another 6% were almost perfectly accurate.
And an amazing 0% were actually referenced in this interview.
It is fascinating stuff. I suppose the question that immediately leaps to mind is how you do map that onto the biblical account, the Christian account of what it is, the afterlife. Because I think Christians are a bit wary of saying there's lots of souls floating about us and there's kind of ghostly kind of people and so on. Even though you do get absolutely orthodox Christian people who would say, I had the sense when my mother died of something happening, her spirit in some way being released or being taken to heaven or whatever it is.
What happens if 2 people have an NDE in the same hospital at the same time? I'm pretty sure that has happened. But they didn't see each other. They weren't aware of each other. It's almost as though it's isolated within the individual having the NDE. Wow. Deep, man.
I mean, how do you map these kind of extraordinary stories that appear to have this verifiable aspect to them?
Appear? It's not even that good, Justin. Come on, you want to call bullshit, but you're being nice. Be less Christian, Justin. Call it out. Go on, I dare you.
On to the fact that obviously we do believe in Christian thought that the soul, as it were, goes to be with Jesus. How do you kind of, reconcile the fact that it seems to be able to be doing things and seeing things that are still going on in that moment?
Yeah,
Decent question. I like that angle, Justin.
I think the fact that these are reversible cases of death, in other words, these people are coming back, they're not irreversible, that perhaps we're dealing with something that's not quite exactly what the Bible's talking about, in terms of being immediately in the presence of God, it seems to suggest, Paul's comment.
Are you struggling, Lee? It sounds like it.
And I take a minimalist approach. I don't base my theology on near-death experiences. But I take a minimalist approach, which is to say that I believe the corroborated cases of near-death experiences,
of which you have provided exactly 0, Lee. So first, let's actually have some corroborative cases, because that has not been established yet.
Do establish beyond a reasonable doubt that our consciousness, our spirit, our soul does survive for a period of time after our clinical death. I think that can be said with strong confidence.
You might think that. Lots of others cry, bullshit. Bullshit.
Now, and I think that it's consistent with Christian theology. I think what you sometimes get, interestingly, is people who have an experience like this who view it through a different lens and interpret it differently.
So not at all like Christianity then. Okay.
Also, 23% of the cases are not positive cases. They're horrific cases. They're horrible cases. They're cases where people experience tremendous trauma. I think of Howard Storm, who we interview in the film. Howard Storm was an atheist. He was an art professor and a chairman of the art department at a secular university, tenured position. He died in a hospital. He was lured away by some friendly folks who then turned on him and began to attack him physically. They ripped him apart. He said, "I was roadkill." He said no horror film can begin to approach the horrific nature of this assault that he was experiencing from these apparent demons or something.
See the links at 13 for more detail on the Howard Storm case. It certainly bucks a trend for the typical NDE. Howard is now a reverend and encourages people to follow Jesus while soliciting for financial donations. Like every other NDE testimony, there is literally nothing that can be validated. How you respond to Howard's story hinges on the question, do you believe the story is telling you is true? I say, no, I do not. Lee, presumably, says yes, he does. Is there any way to independently test who is right? No, there is not. I certainly will not believe a story like this on a maybe. I need more than that. Pascal's wager does not shift me. If you believe Howard's story, ask yourself why. What is it that causes you to think it is true? If any part of the answer is that you have other reasons for believing that he's talking about real entities, then you are not believing his story on its evidential value. You are believing it because it fits your worldview.
How would you encourage Christians to use this kind of apologetic when it comes to engaging with friends who may be skeptical?
I really do believe that this is a more relevant topic than ever. That getting into a conversation with a non-believer about death and the afterlife is very easy these days. And so I think people are more curious than ever about the afterlife. And that makes it easy to get into a conversation, to invite them to see the movie, to give them the book. It's a starting ground for people. And everything in my book, everything in my apologetic points toward, ultimately, the teachings of Scripture. And I have 2 chapters on hell. I don't shy away. I deal with annihilationism. I deal with universalism.
Let's be clear here. By deal with, Lee means dismisses completely. Lee holds to the idea of eternal conscious torment, the most obscene, the most despicable form of afterlife that his Christian God could possibly hold. That's the God that Lee believes in, and that is not a God I will ever worship.
So I think these are issues that are especially relevant these days, and especially easy for Christians to get into conversations with people. And as you said earlier, Justin, I think it is true that people are curious about near-death experiences. I've had 2 instances, this is interesting, 2 instances where I've been interviewed by secular journalists about the movie, And as an aside, later they tell me, oh yeah, my dad had a near-death experience exactly like that.
I'm not really sure how this is an answer to Justin's question about how you talk to people who are sceptical like myself. But hey, Lee won't pass up on an opportunity to plug and push his book.
And I was really amazed at the number of people. I mean, there are literally, statistically speaking, millions of people around the world who've had these kind of near-death experiences.
And every single one of them is subjective, and absolutely none of them have validatable, confirmable facts.
The important thing, the key thing to me, is the degree to which these near-death experiences are consistent and corroborative of what the Bible teaches.
The Bible teaches that our disembodied soul can see shoes on roofs. Wow, I must have missed that verse.
Thank you so much for your time today, Lee.
Can I just say, Justin, I really appreciate what you are doing. Your ministry and what you do there with Unbelievable and your podcasts and shows and so forth.
Giving Christians the opportunity to expose the holes in the apologetics that they use so that people like me can come and laugh all over them. Brilliant, Justin. Thanks for that. Really appreciate it. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.